The Magic Lantern Transferring Opera and Caricature to Brazil. Opera and singers have always instigated different reactions in audiences, which can be verified in newspapers, magazines, diaries, travel accounts, and also in paintings, portraits, caricature, among others. The impressions left by the voices and the music, and by various elements of a singer's performance on stage and in social life, besides his or vocal qualities, can generate powerful images. At the same time, while creating and repeating several commonplaces, these images may be used in different contexts with various purposes. When we examine some details of The Magic Lantern, published in Rio between 1844 and 1845, we will find some important elements that help to understand the circulation of opera and caricature, and also some aspects of social criticism in Rio in the first half of the 19th century. Created by Araújo Portalegre, who is the author of the text, with engravings by his disciple Rafael Mendes de Carvalho, The Magic Lantern, plastic, philosophical periodical, divided in acts and scenes, contains a long prologue in which Portalegre elaborates a series of ironic considerations on his hero, Laverno, sort of Mephistopheles, of wandering Jew, as he says, who together with Belchior dos Passos goes through numerous adventures that constitute a new epic of our times. In his several impersonations, Laverno's aim is to make money and conquer the audiences, so richness and glory are his main aspirations. In the 23 issues, there are 18 images and 3 music scores, one of the Gran Scena, recitative and aria di bravura, and 2 lundus, all by Dr. José Maurício Nunes Garcia, who is the son of José Maurício Nunes Garcia, the priest. A quick note on Portalegre. He was one of the main figures in the cultural life of Rio de Janeiro. Born in 1806 in the province of Rio Grande do Sul, he went to Rio in 1827, where he became the favorite pupil of Jean-Baptiste de Berne, one of the French artists that went to Brazil in 1816 to found the Academy of Fine Arts. In 1831, Portalegre went to Paris with Debré, going back to Rio in 1837. He's considered one of the founding fathers of the Romantic movement in Brazil. He was, among other things, a painter, a writer, the author of Libretti, the director of the Academy of Fine Arts, a politician, and an indefatigable champion for the cultural life in the country. Another quick comment on the name of the periodical, The Magic Lantern, La Lanterna Mágica, just like the Lampoon, the Lampione, seems to be a common name of various publications inside and outside Europe, combining the idea of an optical device. I won't use the word apparatus, dispositif right now to avoid any Foucault-Deleuze connections right now, and that projects light and quick images, sketches, phantasmagoria, and texts as an efficient medium for spreading caricature and criticism of social life. In the case of Brazil, the Magic Lantern, constantly mentioned as the first vehicle for caricature in the country, not the first caricature though, was well studied in recent books and articles. The dependence on its French model, Le Sang et en Macaire, with engravings by Honoré Daumier, has been clearly established. In this publication, the main character also impersonates different roles, 101, actually 98 more or less, such as the doctor, the teacher, the artist, the salesman, and so on, in order to deceive people and to get rich. Eliana Salgueiro showed the many common traits between the Brazilian caricatures and their French counterparts, in the composition and in some elements of the plot. My intention here is more punctual. I will examine the role of opera in the Brazilian publication, especially in its relation to caricature. Some of the images I will show you indicate a close affinity with opera. And there is the more specific episode of La Signora Lavernelli, an opera singer that appears in few occasions and who seems to rapture the hero in the last issue. It is important to notice that of all the characters in the Saint Robert Macaire, there is only one musician, the conductor. The main subject here evokes an ancient and long theoretical discussion about the relation between music and poetry. After insisting that people are always eager for new inventions, the author indicates that the new music, pyrotechnical, charivarique, and diabolic, is noteworthy, especially in its insistence on noise. So the discussions about the primacy of poetry over music are set aside because audiences were more interested in novelties and roaring sounds. The image shows Macaire as a conductor-composer, surrounded by music scores, instruments, musicians, and a cannon about to be lit. In the foreground, a man with a hammer right before striking a pot. The text emphasizes the virtues of noise, something usually associated with Rossini's compositions. But as mentioned before, it is the only direct reference to music in all the episodes. Other characters appear in both the French and the Brazilian publications, but the presence of a female singer as one of the possibilities to lure the audience is a specific choice of the Brazilian artist in the Lanterna Magica. Already in the prologue, Portalegre warned that he would show, I quote, the theater where the main scenes of our times are represented, building the theatrical metaphor for the whole action. However, right on the first illustration in the Magic Lantern, we find a more specific clue about which theatrical role was chosen by the authors. When Laverno and Belchior are discussing the various stratagems to entrap people, particularly the use of foreign names, we see an advertisement of a performance of Norma at the Teatro São Pedro, the opera house. Thus, a reference to opera appears right on the first image, which indicates, on the one hand, the prominence of this kind of spectacle in Rio de Janeiro, especially after the return of opera seasons at the São Pedro as of January 17, 1844, with, of course, Norma. On the other hand, it may suggest the structural role of opera in the publication. In issue number 3, we find a letter to the readers in which Portalegre exposes some ideas about opera. The old Gluck Piccini controversy in the 18th century France, something already discussed in the Revista Niterói, published in Paris in 1836, with a long debate on the nature of music, the relation between harmony and melody, on pleasure and truth in the arts, and some other musical topics, particularly the operatic ones. All these had appeared in his other writings, mostly those concerned with the national character in music. But in a satirical publication as The Magic Lantern, this discussion might sound a little displaced. However, there are previous and illustrious examples by other authors where long musical or artistic debates are present. Just as a reminder, both Gambara and Massimiliadoni by Balzac bring such musical digressions. This should not be seen as a fortuitous comparison, since even in different ways, both the Committee Men and the Magic Lantern criticize society. The musical digression operates as an introduction to the fourth scene, the one that shows the great Signora Lavernelli, first soprano of the Royal Theatre of San Marino. Here we find a central episode in the collection. If homeopathy, had already been presented as novelty, as a recent fashion to treat diseases, when sick people would believe anything in order to get salvation, the charms of opera could bring the comfort so desired by those willing to pay. The caricature makes some explicit statements. We see a corpulent singer, grandiloquent gestures, a somewhat goofy face in front of an agape audience, laurel wreaths about to be thrown, especially by Belchior, who is standing in the balcony. Under the dress, we can still see the pants and the shoes of a man, which remotely reminds me of Cesare Ripa's emblem of fraud in his Iconologia. On the one hand, there is the exaggeration of opera and singers, on the other, the astonished audience. The whole scene is about how to be successful in front of a foolish crowd. The resources are various: the Italian name, the fascination with foreigners, a resounding past, even if fake, the expectation created by newspapers before the performance, the easy applause that follows the clap, the comparison, even if not deserved, to other great singers. She quotes, Lavernelli quotes, Catalani, Mali, Brampasta, Grisi, Persiani, Brambilla, Boccabadati, Cinti, Ungar, and others. all topics constantly treated by the numerous critics of opera. Below the image, we can read the verses of the Aria di Bravura, which is part of a long scene, mostly in macaronic Italian, throwing recurrent words in opera and mostly revealing Laverno's ambition. Regarding verisimilitude, it is hard to think how it would be possible for a man dressed as a woman to deceive the audience with his falsetto voice, pretending to be a woman even if he were talented. It's a pity because right beside us, Robert Crowe is discussing Carl Blumenfeld's career. But here we are in the domain of theater, of consented deception, and mostly in the domain of opera, where even the plausible can be sacrificed for the grand effect. It is also curious to notice that the aria makes the charlatan's intention explicit, that is, to attain glory through applause and earn a lot of money. The members of the audience, who are directly named as payers, do not seem to understand the meaning of what is being sung. Once again, we see the criticism against an excessive fascination with opera and with all that is foreign. After this first sort of apparition, Lavernelli vanishes and returns in few other passages. In the illustration of Scene 5, a pagodia, a musical gathering, we see a large poster announcing the benefit performance for the singer at the San Pedro Theatre. She's mentioned again in Scene 13 when Laverno is said to be the author of a musical treatise, and she returns triumphantly in the last episode when Laverno seems to be delirious. He talks as if he were the singer herself without acknowledging it, which surprises Belchior. Both had decided to leave the country in a mix of spite and disdain, and Lavernelli, La Signora Lavernelli, it is La Signora Lavernelli that takes on the speech. Imagine all the fortune they would make with new jobs in a prima donna outbreak. So she says, I have done with such appraisal the Norma from Il Belisario, the Norma from Il Barbiere, the Norma from Madonna del Lago, the Norma from Anna Bolena, the Norma from Il Furioso, the Norma from Torquato Tasso, the Norma from Mime and from Chemistry, the Norma from Les Goualeuse. The conversation becomes something closer to an opera dialogue when a series of pauses, hesitations, and the vocabulary imitate some aspects of Ribery writing, also because they start talking in an Italian way. I won't read everything, but they start in Portuguese and then they go denaro, molto denaro, io voglio solamente per fare di norme in questo paese, capite? And così via. The scene goes on with Lavernelli, almost possessed, talking in Italian all the time, insisting on his or her greed. Only by the end Laverno is back and no one understands what happened. Belchior supposes it was the influence of magnetism or a dream. Magnetism is also present in Robert Macaire. And finally we see the farewell scene with people crying in the background. There are some repetitive things that deserve some attention here. The constant reference to Bellini's Norma, of course, the centrality of the female singer as a preponderant character in the world of opera, and mostly the strange choice of a man impersonating a female singer as the most adequate means to criticize the Brazilian or the Carioca society. Regarding the first two aspects, there is nothing really new. Since the closure of the San Pedro Theatre in 1831, and after its reopening in 1844, a new frenzy agitated the audiences in the city. And it is precisely in the 1840s that we see the surge of new productions and a growing interest in them with the usual traits: the dispute between two prime donne and their fans, the interest on the main repertory, Norma, Barbieri, Belisario, Donna del Lago, Elisir Lamori, Anna Bolena, etc., the arrival of foreign troops and the comparison with Brazilian singers, and also the consolidation of musical criticism. Norma, in this context, rises as the favorite opera performed for the first time in Rio in 1844. It rapidly became a constant bill, which can be noticed in various literary references and, of course, in the caricatures. All this attests the central place of music, and more specifically of opera, in the various aspects of social life in Rio, from the performances in different theaters, to the diffusion of the repertory in salons, in piano small group arrangements, or still the perpetuation of opera melodies in bands or in prosaic whistling. However, the centrality of Norma is amplified in the Lanterna Magica through the presence of posters and scores, and here we see the scores, in the parodistic music also, but we had seen this, the first image here, and there's another one in the middle with another reference to Norma and also to homeopathy. So the parodistic music sung by Lavernelli, but mostly through the singer's lunatic speech that transforms Norma in the protagonist of all operas. The question of singers, mostly female singers, as the core element in opera is not new either. We have previous examples in Brazil that go from the Brazilian Joaquina Lapinha, the Italian Castrato Fasciotti, up to Teresa Schironi, and since the reopening of the Opera House, Augusta Candiani, Chiara Del Mastro, Rosine Stokes, and Rachele Agostini. Maybe it is the first time we have so many written references to the frenzy caused by a singer in the city, from leaflets to newspapers, from poems to memoirs, such as the one by Machado de Assis. Singers were at the center of attention, and in Laverno's vision, they were allowed to do anything they wanted. So we can find criticism by Portalegre against the repetitive repertoire and the eternal cult of prime donne. In the world of caricature and opera, the latter is usually represented as a social event, especially in Daumier's caricatures. There are, of course, many examples of specific singers portrayed with their distinctive virtues or vices, but usually the act of going to the opera or being at the opera house is what interested artists the most. Even in this case, the audience reactions are very important, maybe more than the singer's gestures. Combined with texts, we realize that the authors are mostly criticizing the ignorance and the almost childish reactions of the subservient audience, which becomes an easy prey to any unscrupulous impostor. Of course, singers have always been accused of being exaggerated, and arias are certainly the moment when characters are just raptured by their affections. So what can be seen as an exaggeration is somehow similar to the procedures of caricature, which reinforces several aspects of different people or situations in order to punish vice through laughter. A serious aria does not lead to laughter, though, but there is some affinity in this relation that still needs to be investigated. Portalegre's intention was certainly to criticize various aspects of cultural and social life in Rio. One of the largest vices was the will to deceive people. At the same time, the ingenuity and the propensity to believe in anything that looked good, even if it was not, were also targeted. The attraction to foreign elements is the most recurring criticism. In a country full of contradictions and struggling to build some kind of identity, everything that appeared to be civilized was enough to satisfy the uncultivated masses. Portalegre, in all his texts and numerous activities, was always in search of ways to improve the country through education and certain civilizing measures. There is sometimes a very clear moralistic intent in his actions, and he was resentful regarding Brazil and its people. In a certain way, he felt like an expatriate in his own country and tried to remedy that with no success, just like Robert Macaire and Laverno. Leaving the ungrateful country seemed the only viable option. In the case of the Magic Lantern, more than in Portalegre's other writings, we may recognize some of the limits of his proposals. It is certain that Laverno is a crook and that he has no will to contribute to the progress of the country. He performs many actions only to get rich and to become famous. But even if successful, he feels despised and misunderstood by the people. It is as even for an impostor with many talents, there would be no place for him in the country. And then again, reappears the female singer, opera singer. Laetitia Scav has already showed that the final delusional scene is an identity crisis, an impossibility of existing for those who want to combine an experience abroad with life in Rio de Janeiro. The opera, the singer, although one of the greatest European contributions, and therefore something that was seen as civilizing, is compared to the exaggerate and the complete madness, to the total loss of identity, or rather to the impossibility of building a national identity when trying to merge the European and the Brazilian. Baudelaire's writings are usually invoked to understand caricature, but maybe here there is a slightly different case. The comic and the rire, not the rire satanique, do not seem to be a mark of modernism, not even the alleged Mephistophelian aspect of the main character. I believe that Porto Alegre's view is more tied to the old rhetorical and poetical tradition, and can also be regarded as a third or fourth wave of the Enlightenment. Of course, in this context, the choice of a transvestite as the main structural device for the cycle is not obvious, for many reasons. The crime of transvestism and sodomy was not typified in the 1830 criminal code in Brazil, but the crime of moral offense was used to replace those. At the same time, in theaters, men performing female roles were still somewhat common, even in the 19th century Brazil. For Porto Alegre, the male-female singer is taken as an emblematic figure that allows a more radical criticism on society, but the solution he proposes remains operatic. The transfer of opera, caricature, and even criticism was still problematic. Thank you.